It's the endless search for guitar and bass, the perfect pickup. We're always swapping them out, spending more money, not understanding why we're not getting the results we really want, and then spending more money, spending more time, when you really need to be doing something else. That'll save you a ton of time, get you exactly the result you want, and save you a ton of money. What's the secret? Let's get at it. So I've been a pickup fanatic for a long time, and I've tried out, last time I checked, well over about 130 pickups. And that's for guitar only. Then I've gone through probably another 40 for bass. Yeah, I've done it all. So I speak from experience when I say you can really go down a rabbit hole. But in the past few years, I've been using another technique that's helped me out a lot, and it's also been able to get me exactly the sound I want with almost any pickup that comes stock in a bass. Now, the secret to this is really going to seem kind of obvious once you think about it. But so often we tend to put in a pickup and then think of it as this thing that can't be changed. And then we try and EQ it at our amp, or we try and EQ it with a preamp and all these things, rather than thinking of it from kind of a different perspective. Basically, all a pickup is a microphone with a certain EQ filter on it. So, can we learn how to EQ our pickups? You can, and the secret to that is impulses. If you're not familiar with impulses, I'm going to be doing a second part to this video that's going to show you all about them, but basically impulses are kind of a capture of an EQ spectrum. And don't worry, we're going to go through this. But most commonly, they're used for speakers, like cab simulators, things like that. I'm sure you've probably heard, seen that, like you have a cab sim out on maybe a preamp, or if you've used virtual instruments or direct outs, they have a model of the speaker cabinet already done in there. That's what an impulse is. So if you can use it at the end of the chain to imitate a speaker, you can also use it at the front of the chain to imitate a particular pickup curve, an EQ, and a ton of other things. So to demonstrate this and to show you how you can get the results you want out of what you already have and how to make smarter decisions about your pickups, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take two basses with as different a tone and approach as I could find in my collection. The first one we're going to do is, I've got an Ibanez here that's got passive Nordstrand pickups. This is an active preamp, but I've got the active off. We're going to go at this from a just passive setup. It's a completely different bass. We're not going to swap the pickups in, from the other one. So you've got different body wood. You've got everything else that is different from this bass, which is going to be a Brian Bromberg Peavey with a graphite neck, and I've got EMGs in it. These are active. Much more compressed, and this is overall made out of much brighter woods. So about as different as it gets in between these two instruments and in between these two basses. They're also strung with different strings. The output of the Nordstrands, being passive, are much lower, and these are higher output. So they're about as different as can be. So let's see if we can get one to sound like the other. Okay, so what we have here is two clips, one of the EMG and one of the Nordstrand. One of the things you want to try and pay attention to when you're going to do some EQ matching is you want to try and play something that's as close to the other example as possible. If you have both basses like I do in this example, try and play something identical so that you get the same type of spectrum analysis and same degree of EQ width and spectrum for the analysis to be done. So, just play something similar, or if it's not an example that you created, try and just get in the same range. If it's mostly low end, try and play mostly low end. So let's hear what we have here with the EMG, and then we'll compare it to the Nordstrand with no EQ on either one. Okay, and now the Nordstrand. So you can hear a clear difference in between them. Surprisingly already, though, the Nordstrand has the same clarity as the EMG, but you can also tell if you're used to looking at waveforms, the EMG is much more compressed and the Nordstrand is much more dynamic. So if you're going to truly match these, you probably want to use a compressor with the Nordstrand to get that same type of really upfront, even attack. But again, if this is something that you're trying to get where you want a more open, passive feel with a pickup, but you want the EMG coloring, this may be what you're after, leaving it as is with no compression, but just matching it for overall EQ. So what I've done is take both of these and I've sent them to one bus where I've put the EQ match software that we're going to use on it. You don't have to do that. You could have these both on the same track and just do them individually. For the sake of the example and keeping them separate, I feel like this is the best way. So I've got them both sent to this bus here, and I'm using the New Gen Audio SEQST. It's a really simple way to match things, and I like this software myself, but you don't have to use this one. There's good stuff from Isotope. Voxengo makes some decent stuff, all kinds of things. So you can use this, but all of them will work fundamentally in the same way. So let's get our first sample here, and we're going to start with the EMG. So I'm going to actually take even the preamp off that I've got boosting so that we get just the clear straight signal. And I'm going to send the EMG to it. So I'm going to activate this. I'm going to hit match. And the match from means the source EQ that you're going to apply to something else. So I'm going to do record a new snapshot, and I'm going to make sure I have a good time for sample. And then I'm just going to go ahead and push play and then record. All right, so I'll save that one. And now I'm going to mute that one and turn on the Nordstrand. And I'm going to use that as the apply to, meaning that I'm going to try and match the EMG spectrum to the Nordstrand. Okay, so we have both of our signals in, and right away from the graph, the bright green being the Nordstrand, one of the things you can tell right away is it has a much sharper taper off on the high end. The EMG has a much more extended treble, so we should see a reflection of that in the end EQ graph. Let's see. Right on the mark. So what you can see is it actually pulled most of the rest of the signal down to add as much extended high end as the EMG does. It's a pronounced amount. So let's go back, and I'm going to turn the preamps on so we can hear a bit of body with it. Let's hear the EMG and this thing's first attempt at imitating it. And now let's go to the Nordstrand with the EQ. Not too bad. There's a little bit of grunt I feel needs to be added in, but at this stage, what you want to start doing is varying how much you want that EQ applied, because sometimes it's just not that exact as far as the ratio in between the actual signal and the affected in getting a good match. So let's take the depth down a little bit, meaning apply less of it, and see how that works. Back to the EMG. That's pretty close. So right away, we have a pretty good match going on. One of the things that's going to make this impossible to get it dead on exact is that compression thing. You're just going to hear a little more articulation out of the EMG than you will the Nordstrand because it's compressed and up front. But yeah, already just with a slight modification of how much of the EQ is being applied, we got a really, really close signal here. So at this point, what I would probably do is decide how happy I am with this. I may make a few changes, and then I'll run the impulse through this EQ and then into the unit. So I have this for live or in the studio. I'll explain that in a minute. But let's talk about a few things that maybe you want to do and create the perfect pickup. So let's say I love the EMG sound, but I want a little bit of a bump at a certain frequency. Again, I'll talk about this a little more later, but I can go in and alter this frequency in certain applications if I want to create a hybrid of these two pickups plus my own EQ. So that could be done here, and really the sky's the limit. But this is really the point where I would probably go in and say, I've got a pretty good match. I may just add a little tweak EQ and run my impulse from here. And like I said, I'm going to run you through a second video just about impulse creation because that's a whole thing in itself. There are other tutorials. A number of them are pretty good. I recommend checking them out. But it's not that difficult. And you could see how quickly I was able to do this. Now, the other thing is, even if you don't want to use an impulse, you can look at this and say you get yourself a digital EQ. I think Source Audio makes one that you can program and call up presets. Let's say you skip the impulse entirely, but you can look at this and see, okay, I want to dip at about 700, a little more of a dip at what it looks like about 1.8. And then I'm going to start boosting everything above 5 hertz increasingly, or 5K, I'm sorry. And you're going to be able to come up with something pretty quickly. So even though we're talking about using impulses here, you can use this in another approach because really we're just dealing with EQ. That's all we're doing. Again, when we talk about what a pickup is, it's a microphone with a certain EQ curve that picks up your strings. So let's hear these one more time, and then we'll wrap this video in a minute with a couple other ideas on how you can use this. The only difference I hear predominantly in a way that sticks out is this high end is a little bit much added to the Nordstrand. I'd probably just pull these down a little bit in my final impulse, just a tiny bit to take that edge off, and you got a damn fine pickup match. So here's how you can start to eliminate so many pickups and make one purchase that's going to help you out with all of this. Now, to demonstrate how I might take these impulses and use them is I actually have 2 cab sim pedals on my board, both of them from AMT. This one is the one that I use to EQ my instruments, and I use this in a couple of different ways. The first is I have an impulse based on my best sounding bass with EMGs in it. And then I have it matched to all my other basses, so one, all my basses sound the same. That live or recording, I get the EQ curve and all the little notches that make my best sounding bass sound the way it does added on to my other basses. So I can pick up any of them and get exactly the sound I want. The other thing that's really cool about having them all matched is that it means that if anything goes down, I can literally switch to any bass at all. The other cool thing is I can make my own perfect pickup out of this. Because when I do an impulse for a specific bass, I can add an EQ to it as well and put in a couple notches that I might like. One of the ways that I use this is that I prefer the X series from EMG. It has bigger headroom and has extended bass and high end. The only problem is when I get to using really sharp high gain, like say with the Doug Pinnick preamp from Tech 21 or something, the extended high range becomes too much and it adds way too much presence to it. And I wind up a lot of times, up until now, swapping back to the older original EMGs that didn't have quite that level going out. So what I do now is I have a snapshot of the original EMGs placed on over top of my EMG-X, and I can hit that preset when I want to use high gain and not have to change basses or swap out the pickups. So I can make the X sound like the older ones by dialing off a little bit of the top end, and I even add a few notches for myself that I prefer to have, and then 1 foot switch, click, I'm ready to go, and my pickups are custom notched for exactly the end result I want. So I have this one that EQs my pickups, and then this one with much more extended type of things in it with compression and effects and things at the end of my chain. So I start here, go through my preamps, end up here. So I get the same product, or I can also, on the other end, go back and have certain basses that I want notched a certain way for different effects. Maybe I want the basses to sound different. You can shoot an impulse and create one with exactly the EQ curve you want for maybe a song where you change tunings and you want to adapt it for something like that, or a song where the guitar sound is really different and you need to cut through in a certain way. Works great for that too. I hope this gives you a bunch of ideas and it saves you a ton of time and energy in trying out all these pickups, and especially with bass when you get them in form factors that they don't always work for your bass or something. Want your P-bass to sound like a Music Man? Get a capture or a sample of that Music Man, match it to your P-bass. There you go. So, try this out. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know how this works out, any experiments you have. And again, I'm going to be doing a secondary video showing just how to create impulses. I want to get the point across in this one and then get into the science of the impulses in a second video. So make sure to hit that button in the bell, like, subscribe, do all that. Make sure you hit the bell so that you get the notification when that one pops up. Join me on that and you'll get the complete lesson. So I hope this helps you out. Always appreciate you checking it out. I'm interested to hear your comments and your thoughts down below, and I will see you on the next one.